World War II ended in 1945, bringing victory over fascism. But the peace lasted for mere months. The alliance between the United States and the Soviet Union immediately shattered. In the rubble of Europe, a new, global ideological struggle was born: the Cold War. This period from 1945 to 1991 was a struggle for global influence between the democratic, capitalist United States and the communist Soviet Union. The conflict wasn't just fought on battlefields. It raged with economic aid, espionage, proxy wars, and a terrifying nuclear arms race. This video covers both the policy of containment abroad and the bitter ideological suspicion that developed at home. If you're learning about how two superpowers completely reshaped the world, please hit the like button and subscribe. What do you think was the single biggest mistake either side made in the early Cold War? Let us know in the comments below. The fundamental US strategy adopted was the containment policy. The goal was to limit communist expansion without engaging in direct, militarily catastrophic conflict with the USSR. This policy first materialized as the Truman Doctrine in 1947. President Harry Truman committed the US to supporting free peoples who are resisting attempted subjugation by armed minorities or by outside pressures. This commitment first materialized as economic and military aid provided to Greece and Turkey, helping them resist communist pressures. Next came the Marshall Plan, 1948 to 1952. Recognizing that post-war economic devastation made Western European nations highly susceptible to communist political appeal, the US instituted a massive program of economic recovery aid. This was not merely humanitarian aid, but a sophisticated strategic tool that utilized the free enterprise system to rebuild infrastructure and ultimately undercut the appeal of radical communist movements. The world's first major Cold War flashpoint was the Berlin airlift, 1948 to 1949. When the Soviets blockaded land access to West Berlin, the US and its allies responded with a sustained, year-long airlift. The airlift successfully supplied the city and demonstrated Western resolve to defend its interests without resorting to military conflict. Finally, the formation of NATO, North Atlantic Treaty Organization, in 1949 codified the principle of collective security in Western Europe, signaling that an attack on one member would be treated as an attack on all. The containment policy faced its first major military test on the Korean Peninsula. The Korean War began in June 1950 when Communist North Korea invaded US-supported South Korea. The fundamental cause of US involvement was the policy of containment. The US viewed the invasion as a Soviet-backed attempt to expand communism by force. Ignoring this challenge, policymakers believed, would undermine all containment efforts worldwide. This intervention decisively ended the last vestiges of American isolationism. The US intervened quickly under the flag of the United Nations, successfully pushing the North Korean forces back to the 38th parallel. Key events included intense battles, such as the breakout of the US 1st Marine Division from the Chosin Reservoir. This struggle was against massive numbers of Chinese communist forces, who had intervened later in the war. The conflict was brutal, involving US bombing campaigns and trench warfare similar to World War I. The fighting concluded in July 1953 with an armistice, not a peace treaty, leaving the peninsula divided at the Demilitarized Zone, DMZ. The outcome demonstrated that the US was committed to defending containment globally, but it resulted in an inconclusive territorial change. The war was devastating, resulting in approximately 35,000 US soldiers' lives lost and an estimated 2 to 3 million Korean casualties. The US president was able to wage a major 3-year war using military force without a formal declaration of war from Congress. The Korean War cemented the division of the post-war world into two adversarial camps. and set the inevitable stage for the nuclear arms race. The tension of the global conflict fueled domestic paranoia, giving rise to one of the darkest periods in American civil liberties, the Red Scare. The domestic fear was primarily driven by the House Un-American Activities Committee, HUAC, which investigated alleged communist infiltration across American society. But the era took its name from a single man. McCarthyism refers to the practice, led by Senator Joseph McCarthy, of making reckless, often unsubstantiated accusations of disloyalty and subversion. McCarthy, a Republican senator from Wisconsin, rose to prominence in the early 1950s with sensational claims, most famously that he held a list of communists who had infiltrated the State Department. This climate of fear resulted in the blacklisting and suppression of dissent across Hollywood, universities, and government institutions. At its height, a culture of paranoia took hold where neighbors suspected neighbors, and intellectual curiosity was viewed as potentially subversive. Simultaneously, the Cold War was defined by the escalating technological competition. The arms race began with the Soviet acquisition of nuclear capability and their subsequent development of the hydrogen bomb. This led to the Doctrine of Mutually Assured Destruction, MAD, a terrifying acronym where both superpowers possessed the capacity to annihilate the other, creating a tenuous, perpetual nuclear standoff. The space race began dramatically on October 4, 1957, when the Soviet Union successfully launched Sputnik, the first artificial satellite to orbit Earth. The Sputnik launch shocked the United States, raising fears that the Soviets were gaining a dangerous technological lead in missile capability. This anxiety led to massive increases in defense spending and mandated reforms in U.S. education, particularly in science and mathematics. The ideological struggle also resulted in intense and sometimes absurd intelligence gathering efforts. Illustrating the bizarre lengths the U.S. was willing to go, the CIA attempted Operation Acoustic Kitty, implanting microphones and transmitters into cats for surveillance. From the Marshall Plan to the bloodshed of the Korean conflict, the U.S. established the blueprint for its Cold War strategy, containment. It was a costly policy, but one that prevented Soviet communism from expanding across the globe into Western Europe. The first decade of the Cold War was defined by a rapid, often frantic escalation of capabilities, driven by the space race abroad and shadowed by paralyzing fear at home. The American public, reeling from the Red Scare and shocked by Sputnik, was primed for the next major crisis. That crisis came in October 1962, when the world came closest to nuclear catastrophe. Next time, we'll cover the Cuban Missile Crisis and the global tensions of the Vietnam War. Thank you for watching. Subscribe so you don't miss Part 2, and answer, what piece of Cold War technology has had the biggest impact on your life? Until next time, stay curious.